Welcome dear learners. This lecture on Indology and Introduction has been developed based on selected reference available. It has been divided into the following subtitles, namely a brief historical background of Indian studies, Indological as an approach, various schools in Indological studies, a general outline of Indology and Orientalism, further discussion as cases. Shall we now go to the topic? Dear learners, as objectives of this lecture, learners will be enabled to understand the concept of Indology in social sciences, to demand the learners in various school of thought of engaging further discussion, to take active part in the discussion of Indian studies at international outlook. Indology is the study of India. Currently, in many universities, it is called South Asian studies, as there is confusion between political India and the Indian subcontinent. Today, we can identify 4 different schools of Indology: European, American, diasporic and Indian. It is indeed to know about the scholar's view on Indology. Here I would like to emphasize the view expressed by Sithiki to the thought of Indology as in the following. Indology is branch of social sciences dealing with interpretation of ancient texts and linguistic studies of problems of ancient Indian culture. It becomes more comprehensive if supplemented by archaeological, sociological, anthropological, numismatic and ethnographic evidence and vice versa. Available data of these fields are to be augmented by a great deal of honest and competent field work. None of the various techniques can by itself lead to any valid conclusion about ancient India. Combined empirical operations are indispensable. By Sithiki. Indology is known as the science of Indian society. The Indological perspective claims to understand Indian society through the concepts, theories and frameworks that are closely associated with Indian civilization. It made a claim that Indian society is unique in structure, function and dynamics and cannot be associated with any other international societies. Indology relies on book view and culture and criticizes rigorous empirical investigation. Indology is both an approach to study the Indian society and also an independent discipline with Indian society as subject matter. In both, the form Indology consists of studying language, beliefs, ideas, customs, taboos, codes, institutions, rituals, ceremonies and other related components of culture. Indology demands interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary and cross-disciplinary approach. Indology is also older than any other modern disciplines. It is antique in its origin, owing its origin to 1784 by Sir William Jones of Calcutta. Sir William Jones founded the Asiatic Society of Bengal, where he introduced the 2 departments of Sanskrit and Indology. It is the beginning of Indology in India, which has been followed by several other scholars. Now, we will move to the next subtitle, a brief historical background of Indian studies. Indology or Indian studies emerged as a field of academic investigation during the time of British rule in India. However, Indian culture, languages and literature were taken up by scholars even before that. Several ancient literary texts, recorded material and documents can be called upon to trace and understand how far back in time engagement with the Indian society reaches. People of all cultural backgrounds and from all over the world have immersed themselves into understanding and analyzing the vibrant and vivacious culture and people of India. Turkish people, Arabs, Persian and Afghans and even earlier than that the Greeks, Romans, Chinese, Byzantines, Jews etc. all have inquired into the rich cultural structure of India. Perhaps The earliest records of efforts to study Indian society can be traced back to Megasthenes, which is the before Common Era 350 to 290. He was an ancient Greek historian, explorer, and more importantly an Indian ethnographer, a person who studies and describes the culture of particular society or group is called an ethnographer. He was the military attached to India on behalf of the Seleucid Empire, which existed during the Hellenistic period in the court of Chandragupta Maurya, ruling period 322 to 298 BC, the founder of the ancient Maurya Empire. In accordance with the duration of his stay in India and his experiences during that period, Megasthenes composed the famous work Indica, a 4-volume account of India as he saw then. In the books, Megasthenes explored the existence of the caste system, which he accorded to illiteracy prevailing in the country. Although a large part of the books no longer exist now, a few remnants have been restored. Classical geographers Diodorus of Sicily, Strabo and Arrian of Nicomedia have been highly influenced by these works. Others include Chinese Buddhist monk and translator Fagian studied Buddhism in India around 399 Common Era to 412 of Common Era, accounts of which are present in his book, A Record of Buddhist Kingdoms. Muhammad ibn Ahmad al-Biruni, also known as Abu Rayyan al-Biruni, an Iranian scholar and polyhistor, was an author during the Islamic Golden Age from 18th century to 14th century, who wrote extensively on India. In his comprehensive work, A Critical Study of What India Says, whether accepted by reason or refused, every possible dimensions of life in India. His account was all encompassing and consisted of the geography, religion, history, science, mathematics and geology of the country. Al-Biruni's works is considered an Indological piece because it focused on the people and their lives of then India, the cultures, religious practices and science. Other famous works on India include the accounts of the Tughlaq dynasty in India by Ibn Battuta, a Moroccan explorer, in his travel memoir called Rihla. Chinese Buddhist traveler Yuan Shuang's accounts recorded in the narrative Great Tang Records on the Western Regions. Descriptions India by European geographer Joseph Theophendalher and Kashmir's reports by Kalkana in Rajadarangini. As an academic discipline, Indology began to be practiced during the 18th century, marked by the establishment of associations such as Asiatic Society of Bengal, earliest name Calcutta 1784, and journals including Annals of the Bandarkar Oriental Research Institute and Journal of Royal Asiatic Society. The next, Indological as an approach. The Indological approach rested on the assumption that historically Indian society and culture are unique. This uniqueness of Indian society could be grasped better through the texts. Indological approach refers to the historical and comparative method based on Indian texts in the study of Indian society. Indologists use ancient history, epics, religious manuscripts and texts, etc. in the study of Indian social institutions. The texts which Indologists refer basically included the classical ancient literature of ancient Indian society such as Vedas, Puranas, Manusmriti, Ramayana, Mahabharata and others. Indologists analyze social phenomena by interpreting the classical texts. Apart from Sanskrit scholars and Indologists, many sociologists have also used extensively traditional texts to study Indian society. Therefore, it is called as textual view or textual perspective of social phenomena, as it depends upon texts. Thus, textual variety of sociology that emerged in the late 1970s marks a noticeable shift from the European to the American tradition of social anthropology. The studies conducted during this period cover a wide range of subjects such as social structure and relationship, cultural values, kinship, ideology, cultural transactions and symbolism of life and the world. Most of these studies are based on textual materials either drawn from epics, legends, myths or from the folk traditions and other symbolic forms of culture. The next important session is various schools in Indological studies. The European school pioneered Indology in the 18th century and comprised mostly of German and British scholars. They translated Sanskrit texts and tried to construct the doctrine as well as the history of Hinduism along the lines of Christian doctrine and the history. Initially, many saw Hindus as the noble savage yet to evolve scientifically. Later, influenced by racial theory, many spoke of the Aryan invasion of India, equating privileged Hindu communities with invaders no different from Muslims and Europeans, and so stripping them of all moral high ground. Thus was caste explained and colonialization justified. The American school of Indology emerged, challenged colonialism and celebrating the subaltern, the categories overlooked by the Europeans. Thus, greater attention was paid to regional languages, to Dalits, to women, to Hijras, to displaced tribes and unemployed craftsmen. Most things in India were seen through the lens conflict either between religions or caste. Like the European school, they continued to explain everything in terms of good, egalitarian Buddhism and bad hierarchical Brahmanism. Hindu customs and beliefs were psychoanalyzed and suddenly Shiva Linga was reduced to phallic worship. Despite the prejudice, it expanded our understanding of India, uncovering numerous new bodies of knowledge. The diasporic school of Indology has emerged in recent times amongst a section of first and second generation economic migration to Europe and America, who have suddenly found themselves burdened with the task of explaining Hinduism and India to their children and to people abroad. They feel judged, mocked and are often embarrassed of how India is perceived on the world stage. They yearn for pride and often succumb to right-wing propaganda that endorses the Vedic world as magical and perfect before the arrival of the Muslims and Europeans. In these versions of Vedic India, there was no poverty, discrimination or caste. Any challenge to this view is seen as anti-national, data notwithstanding. The irony that non-resident Indians, some without even India passports, are questioning the patriotism of resident Indians is lost on few. Mercifully, a more mature diasporic Indology school based on critical thinking is gradually emerging that does not indulge in victim complex and seeks a more liberal understanding of Hinduism and afraid of Indian complexities. That leaves the Indian school of Indology, which wants to balance the outsider's perspective with the insider's perspective. But since much of academia depends on European and American universities for training, templates and funding, breaking away from the Western paradigm has not been easy. Many have slowly challenged the assumptions and approaches of Western scholars, the tendency to value the textual over the lived experience and the material over memory of myth. They find themselves attacked by European American Indologists as being too defensive and apologetic by right-wing diaspora Indologists for being colonial sipais. Each of these schools is dealing with its own inner demons while trying to solve puzzle that is in India. The more we observe the observers, we realize we must be careful of people who claim to be scientific and objective whether on left or right. Words such as these mask assumptions and agendas of Indologists. In academic circles, it is a common practice to discredit earlier scholars by claiming earlier researchers had an agenda and the current researchers are agenda free. But the fact is, even the most authentic and empathetic contemporary scholar will turn out to have an agenda, which will only be revealed by future researchers. Having an agenda does not make the observer evil or invalid. Everyone has it, and most of the time it is unconscious, awaiting discovery. The next segment is scholars in Indological studies. Focusing on the origin of the perspective, Indological perspective owes its origin to the contribution of the Orientalists like William Jones, Henry Maine and Max Muller, etc. They have contributed tremendously for the development of the society, and from their contribution there was the evolving of Indological perspective. All of them have based their studies on rich cultural tradition of India and the principle that govern India and outlaws of Hindu. Therefore, they were also called as the Indologists. Many founding fathers of Indian sociology are also influenced by Indology. The various scholars are like B.K. Sarkar, G.S. Ghurye, R.K. Mukherjee, K.M. Kapadia, Airavati Karve, P.H. Prabhu, Louis Dimo. Indology and Orientalism. Within Indology, there is the bifurcation of two studies, that is Indology or Indic studies and Oriental studies. Both of them have some commonalities and differences. Indology is a sympathetic and positive picture of non-European society of the East, including Indian society and culture. Orientalism gives an unsympathetic and negative account of the Indian society. Indology is said to be the Westerners' labor of love for the Indian wisdom, and Orientalism emerged as the ideological need of British Empire. Indologists like Jones, Louis Reynaud and Bogle in France and Wilson in British India are the reputed figure, and the Orientalists include Muller, William Orchard, Max Weber and Karl Marx. There is a general tendency among the Indologists either to exaggerate the virtue of Indian culture. Orientalists were trying to see negative aspect of Indian tradition and rationalize missionary activities and colonial legacy. Indologists overemphasized Indian spiritualist and underemphasized the materialist culture, but Orientalists did the reverse as they undermined spirituality and overemphasized on materialistic culture. To sum up this lesson, this lecture has made an attempt to introduce the concept of Indology. It is an approach which basically studies the Indian society. In understanding this perspective, we have discussed about the historical background of Indian studies, Indological as an approach, various schools in Indological studies, Indology and Orientalism as cases. I hope you all must have enjoyed this session and it may have enriched the knowledge on Indology. Dear learners, we will meet with another schedule. Thank you. All the best.